We're continuing the series on forgiveness and reconciliation, made easier. Okay, easier. Not easy, because forgiveness is not always easy, but easier. And so we're looking at part 2 today. And we looked last time at, we got it up there? Yeah. We looked at last time at the vertical relationship. We saw how the vertical relationship is not working. Okay, in the vertical relationship has an impact on. Oh boy, it's still not working. Well, anyway, the vertical relationship with God precedes our ability to forgive others on the horizontal level. Okay, so what happens between me and God? That's what impacts my ability to forgive other people. And this was brought out in Colossians chapter 2 and Colossians 3, 12 to 13. We forgive as God has forgiven us. We forgive as God has forgiven us. We also saw that the chosen and sealed people are forgiving people. So the chosen and sealed people of God are also forgiving people there in Colossians 3, 12 to 13. Then we looked at a couple of stories about how our relationship with Christ affects our ability to forgive others. And we saw, oh dear, going to be random, is it? We saw in Luke chapter 7, 36 to 50, how Simon the Pharisee, he looked down on Jesus first before he condemned the woman. He said, if this man were a prophet, and it reminded us of what Satan said to Jesus when he tempted him, if you are the Son of God, then he would know what sort of person this was. So before he condemned Mary for her act of love, he condemned Jesus first. And yeah, that's how it is. Mary, on the other hand, had the right vertical relationship with God. She understood her condition, and so she did that beautiful act of adorning Jesus' feet with that expensive perfume. When we fully understand how much Christ has forgiven us, this gives us the courage, the ability to forgive other people as well. And then we saw the parable of the unforgiving servant there in Matthew 18, 23 to 35. And like Simon, the unforgiving servant had the wrong relationship with the king. And even though the king forgave him of a huge debt, the man didn't have mercy on his fellow servant who owed him a substantial amount, to be sure. He owed him a substantial amount, but it was still nothing compared to what he had been forgiven. Like Simon, the unmerciful servant showed his deficient vertical relationship with his master, with God. And because of that, when it came to his relationship with his fellow servant, he couldn't find it in his heart to forgive him. Okay, let's see how we go. So that was last week. So today we're looking at the horizontal. Okay, last week we focused on me and God, us and God. Today we're having a look at, okay, what impact does that have for us as well on the horizontal level? Now, people my age, and maybe a bit younger, might have remembered Bill and Hillary Clinton. Okay, Hillary and Bill Clinton. And unfortunately, in a very public way, Bill Clinton was unfaithful to Hillary when he had a relationship with a younger lady, Monica Lewinsky. Hillary Clinton once famously described Bill as being a hard dog to keep on the porch. Not the nicest description. She described him as a hard dog to keep on the porch. And she talked about sort of his serial infidelities in her book, What Happened. And she addresses those dark days of their marriage in this book. And she says, you know about them, and please consider for a moment what it would be like for the whole world to know about the worst moments of your relationship. Something to think about, isn't it? She writes, there were times that I was deeply unsure about whether our marriage could or should survive. But on those days, I asked myself the question that mattered to me. Do I still love him? And can I still be in this marriage without becoming unrecognisable to myself, twisted by anger, resentment, or remoteness? The answers were always yes, so I kept going. And she talks further in the book Living History about when she first found out about Bill's relationship with Monica Lewinsky. She said she could hardly breathe when she found out about it. She continues, I had to work through my feelings carefully on my own timetable, calling the decision to stay with Clinton one of the most difficult decisions I've made in my life. The passage about the Lewinsky scandal was some of the most personal reflections that she has in her book. She discussed turning to her faith, yet feeling unbearably lonely in the aftermath. Wow. And Hillary Clinton is a person of faith, despite what you might have heard in the news. When Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, she still took a Sunday school class, taught a Sunday school class. She's a person of faith. But even in this difficult time, she describes turning to her faith, yet feeling unbearably lonely. Wow, those are really words from the heart, aren't they? And maybe we've been there as well. Maybe we've been there as well in our own lives. And so today, looking at some topics in this forgiveness, this series on forgiveness. How can I forgive and forget? Can I delay forgiving? Okay, I know I need to forgive, but can I delay it? Okay, can I delay it? We've got to really punish them first, don't we? Okay, can I delay forgiving? Is it wrong if I still feel pain after forgiving someone? Okay, is it wrong if I still feel pain after forgiving them? And does forgiveness mean everything is as it was before? So we'll have a look at some of these questions for the sermon today. Now, if there's one book I could recommend about forgiveness and about God's grace, it's this book, What's So Amazing About God's Grace. It's probably about 15, 20 years old now, but man, it's a book I keep coming back to, about what God has forgiven in us, what God's grace is. We know the song, What's So Amazing About God, about grace, but this book I found extremely helpful in understanding God's grace and also how we can be gracious and forgiving to one another. And the difficult things, the difficult things that we can struggle with, even as Christians. Probably one of the greatest areas of guilt for Christians, and not only Christians, but non-Christians, is this idea about forgive and forget. And it's not just something that Christians say. Okay, even non-Christians say, why don't you just forgive and forget? Okay, and I think it causes a lot of guilt. And I'd just like to have a bit of a look at that in Jeremiah chapter 31, 34. I just came in when John Weeks read it. Thank you, John. Jeremiah 31, 34. Jeremiah 31, 34. A little bit of a nuance in here. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 34. No longer will a man teach his neighbour or a man his brother, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their sins and will remember their sins no more. Now, maybe I'm sort of playing with words a bit. But I don't believe that God forgets our sins. I don't believe God forgets them. What he does say is that he doesn't remember them. And there is a difference, isn't there? There is a difference between not remembering something and forgetting something. It's a slight difference, to be sure, but it raises the question, can a God who knows everything forget something? Okay, can a God who knows everything forget something? A bit of a philosophical question. But here, God says, I'll remember their sins no more. Not just doesn't forget about them, but doesn't remember them. And just have a look at a couple of other passages. Psalm 103, verse 12. Psalms 103, verse 12. Psalms chapter 103 and verse 12. Okay, it says here, as far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. As far as from the east is from the west. Now, I read somewhere something that was very interesting about why does it say east and west rather than not north and south, okay? And of course, the Bible doesn't say why, but somebody wrote this that I found very, very interesting, okay? If you, say you're at the South Pole, okay, and you start travelling north, okay, so maybe you're in Australia and you're travelling north up towards the North Pole, okay, when you get to the North Pole and you keep walking in the same direction, what direction are you now going? That's right, you're heading south, okay? So you start off in the south, you head to the north, and then once you reach the North Pole, if you keep going, you're going in a southerly direction, okay? So north and south have sort of met there, okay? Or you've changed between the two directions. However, when you go in a westerly direction, it doesn't matter how long you're walking in a westerly direction, you never change. You never change going in an easterly direction, okay? So east and west, in this way, you never meet. You never change from going from east to west, unless you, of course, turn around. Now, I don't know if the author of Psalms had this in mind, but it was very interesting what this person I read said, that east and west is different because you never, if you keep going in the same direction, you never go in the opposite direction. You just keep going. You might go around a few times, of course, but you're never changing direction. And so here, our sins are cast as far as the east is from the west, not the north from the south. Okay? But God is still there, isn't he? God is everywhere. God is everywhere, so our sins still aren't forgotten. Micah chapter 7, verse 19. Micah chapter 7 and verse 19. Micah 7 and verse 19. Okay, 7th chapter of the little book of Micah and verse 19. You will again have compassion on us. You will tread our sins underfoot and hurl all our iniquities into the depth of the sea. So our sins are cast in the depth of the sea. They're underfoot of God. But God is in the depths of the sea, isn't he? God is in the depths of the sea. So I'd like to suggest that God doesn't forget our sins, but he just doesn't remember them, doesn't use them against us. There's a difference between being forgetful and being forgiving. Okay, there's a difference. Otherwise, people with Alzheimer's are the most forgiving people on earth because they've forgotten everything. Okay, but if you don't remember, you can't show grace. Okay, you can't show grace if you just forget. Okay, so anyway, that's just my thing. You can free to disagree or whatever, but I think it's more a point that God can be trusted with the knowledge of our sin rather than that he forgets about it. And so that's the same with us. Forgive and forget, it's a myth. We can't do it. We can't do it, and we're not expected to do it either. Forgive, yes, but we can't forget, and we don't forget. But forgiving means we don't use it or continue to use it against somebody. That's the difference. So myth busted, forgive and forget. So no need to keep feeling guilty if you don't forgive and forget. The author, David Augsburger, said, "The grease of forgiving love can reduce the friction and salve the irritation. Forgiveness is not wholly amnesia, which erases the past. Instead, it is the experience of healing that draws the poison out. You may recall that hurt, but you may not relive the hurt, or in its entirety, I would add. The hornet of memory may fly again, but forgiveness has drawn out the sting." Very good, isn't it? Very good. So, we don't forget. We don't forget. No such thing as forgetting. It's just what we do with that memory and how we treat the person who's hurt us or whatever. That is the real issue. So, when to forgive? When to forgive? Can we delay forgiving? Okay, I think we all know as Christians we ought to forgive everything of everybody. But can we delay forgiveness? Can we delay it? Okay, let's go to Luke chapter 22, 34. Luke chapter 23, 34. Can't read. Luke chapter 23 and verse 34. Okay, 23rd chapter of Luke and verse 34. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." When did Jesus speak these words? When he was on the cross, that's right. When he was being crucified. Now, Jesus spoke 7 words from the cross, or 7 sentences from the cross. This was the very first one. This was the very first one. And I think that's significant. I really think that it's significant that Jesus said, "Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Which we've seen previously when I took a sermon on this. That was a pretty generous interpretation of Jesus. That they didn't know what they were doing. Now, sure, in the full scheme of things, they didn't know, but they certainly went after him and crucified him. And so, there's been arguments, if you read the commentary, over who Jesus was talking to when he said, "Father, forgive them." Was he talking about the Jews? Because they were his people. Was he talking about the Romans? Because the Jews should have known better. Who was he talking about? Now, Ellen White, she says, every sinner from the beginning of time to the end of time. That's what Jesus was addressing to you and I. You and I. Father, forgive them. But of course, we have to accept that gift of forgiveness, don't we? Or else it's of no use. We can't be saved without accepting that gift. I'd like to suggest that the decision to forgive, we ought to do that immediately. We ought to do it immediately. Okay? Then work through the pain and the emotions and everything else through the prism of forgiveness. Okay? Through the prism of forgiveness, you work through what you've got to work through, the emotions, the pain, whatever. But I'd like to suggest, like Jesus, his first words of the 7 sayings on the cross was, "Father, forgive them." And so in that, I see that we ought to forgive immediately. Okay, immediately. Now, this week, as I was preparing the sermon, as I always like to look for something new, even in old sermons, I came across something which I found quite helpful that actually relates to what I just said. It was by Professor Worthington. And this professor, he suggests that there are actually two types of forgiveness. And I found it very helpful what he said, actually. The first type of forgiveness is decisional forgiveness. That means we mentally make the decision to forgive. Okay? I'm going to forgive. Okay, so that's the first sort of forgiveness, making that decisional forgiveness. But then he says what comes afterwards is emotional forgiveness. Okay, and that's when our feelings sort of catch up. Okay, catch up to our mental decision. Okay, and that can take time. Okay, that can take time. That can take a long time sometimes, working through that. But I found it quite helpful, actually. Just sort of having a look at these two ways. Decisional, yes, I forgive this person, but that doesn't mean all the hurt and everything else all of a sudden disappears. Okay, that can come later. And so, so he describes these two aspects of forgiveness. He says emotional forgiveness involves replacing negative, unforgiving emotions like resentment, bitterness, hate, anger, and fear with either neutrality or positive emotions, such as maybe empathy for the person who has done the hurting, feeling empathy for them of why they did that. Not blaming yourself or whatever, but changing the emotional picture. So I found it quite helpful this week, reading that about these two types, decisional and emotional. And so I would suggest that we ought to forgive immediately before bitterness, anger, resentment, and all of those things take root. Okay, you'll still feel them sometimes, for sure. But you don't want them to take root in your life. That's the issue. And it can take time. And sometimes we're going to have to remind ourselves, well, I've decided to forgive that person. It takes that sort of commitment. Now, forgiveness isn't easy, is it? It's not an easy topic. We've got 5 sermons on it. Something as if, we ought to forgive people. Yeah, we should. But there's a lot to it. That's involved. So making it easier. Now, are things the same after forgiveness? Does forgiveness means everything goes back to the way it was? Well, being an ex-accountant, I like any metaphor that involves bank accounts. Okay, I can enjoy anything and understand anything if you put it in terms of bank accounts. Well, anyway, Stephen Covey, in his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about a metaphor which I've found very, very helpful in what happens after you forgive. Do things go back the way they were? And instinctively we know that they don't always go back to how they were before. Instinctively we know that. And what he says is we actually have an emotional bank account with every person, family and friends, okay? And they have an emotional bank account with us, okay? So we've all got emotional bank accounts with each other. And in some emotional bank accounts, the balances are higher than for other people. Okay, and so he says, this is how we make deposits in the emotional bank accounts that we have with different people. Okay, a deposit is seeking first to understand. Okay, seeking first to understand. A withdrawal is assume you understand. Okay, isn't it annoying when someone thinks they know what you're experiencing or whatever? Okay, so that's a withdrawal when people make assumptions. Okay, showing kindness, courtesy and respect. That builds up the emotional bank account, doesn't it, that we have with another person. Okay, withdrawal is showing unkindness, discourtesy and disrespect. That's a withdrawal from our emotional bank account. Keeping promises. That's an important part. This one that I really struggle with, especially time promises. Man, as Sue can attest to, I'm supposed to be an advert. Well, often very late. So breaking promises. Okay, that's obviously a withdrawal from the emotional bank account. Being loyal to the absent, meaning we don't backstab, okay? We speak well of people, even behind their backs. Okay, a withdrawal is being disloyal and bad-mouthing people. Okay, that affects the emotional bank account. Okay, setting clear expectations is a way to increase the emotional bank account balance. Creating unclear expectations is a withdrawal. Okay, apologising. Okay, that's a big one for increasing the deposits in the emotional bank accounts. Being proud and arrogant, refusing to apologise, that's a withdrawal from the emotional bank account. Okay, giving feedback, iMessages, okay, versus no feedback or evaluative character, you messages, okay, you this, you that. Okay, we're all guilty of that, I know I am. Forgiving is a deposit, okay, holding grudges is a withdrawal. And so I found this very helpful to explain, well, you can forgive somebody, but trust is still gone sometimes, isn't it? Or trust is greatly reduced. And trust takes time to build up, okay? That's the paradox of trust. It takes a long time to build up, but a short time to lose it, okay? And when something happens, we can forgive that person, but the trust balance has still decreased. And it depends. Of course, some things, not a big deal, so it doesn't affect too much, but those big things, they can affect the level of trust. And so we can't just return to how things were before, because the trust that was built up has been taken away. And forgiving alone doesn't build that up at all. And so when we have a high emotional bank account balance, okay, then we can have good relations with people. We don't have to get everything right. We understand, and so that all helps. I like this saying I came across yesterday. You can't talk your way out of problems you behaved yourself into. That's a good saying, isn't it? You can't talk your way out of problems you behave yourself into. You have to behave yourself back into it again. Okay, mere words or whatever. It's actions that will make the difference, not just talking. You can't talk your way out of problems you behave yourself into. Very true, very true. So when we have a high emotional balance, trust is high, communication is easy and effective. Even if the words are a bit wrong, the meaning will get through. But when that emotional balance is low, you weigh every word carefully, don't you? You're walking on eggshells around the person, because if you say the wrong thing, And so this is a reflection of what's that trust balance? What's that trust balance? And so forgiveness can mean I will allow you to build up the trust again, okay? That's what forgiveness can mean in this context. Not that everything is the same, okay? As I say, depending on what it is. If it's a small thing, you don't worry. But if it's a big thing, hey, that's going to take time to get back to how the relationship was before, because that balance has to be built up. Okay, apologising and all of that, of course, that helps. To bring up that balance. But it'll take more. It takes behaviour to do that. And so we need to make constant deposits as the balance drains automatically over time. Very interesting. Okay, we need to make deposits because the balance draws down automatically over time, like a bucket with a hole in the bottom. So we've always got to keep adding deposits. Came across one of the most intriguing verses about Jesus as I was preparing this sermon. See what you think as well in relation to this idea of trust and things like that. Very interesting verse. Okay, let's go to John chapter 2, 23 to 25. John chapter 2, 23 to 25. So it's one of the most intriguing verses about Jesus that I've come across. Okay. John chapter 2, 23 to 25. That's related to what we are talking about. John 2, 23 to 25. Now, while he, Jesus, was in Jerusalem at the Passover, the feast, many people saw the miraculous signs he was doing and believed in his name. Wow, fantastic, fantastic. Verse 24, but Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all men. He did not need men's testimony about man, for he knew what was in man. Very interesting. It says here, Jesus didn't entrust himself necessarily to all people. Okay? He knew what was in their heart. And they might have been all happy and everything else about the miracles and everything else that he's doing. But yeah, here in John, he says Jesus didn't actually entrust himself to them. So yeah, I think there's some biblical basis about the trust account, the emotional bank account that we have with each other. I mean, let's face it, some people we trust more than others, don't we? Okay, it's a fact of life. I'm not, just even as Christians, doesn't mean that we trust everybody with everything of our dark secrets or whatever we're going through. Okay, we've built up trust with certain people, and so we're more free to share some things, and other people we won't. Okay, because the trust balance is not there. It doesn't mean they're bad people, okay, that we're not sharing with or whatever. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means we haven't got that relationship and that trust balance. That's all. But yeah, nothing bad or anything like that. So yeah, but even Jesus was selective in whom he trusted and whom he put his trust in. Very interesting verse. Because we know, he had the three, Peter, James and John, then the 12, then the 70, and then the multitude. And the three were probably his most trusted confidence, as was Mary, Martha and Lazarus. That's another three that were his inner circle. So yeah, it's nothing bad that we have these emotional bank accounts and trust bank accounts with people, and that forgiving doesn't necessarily mean everything is okay. Okay, it simply means we allow the person to build the trust up again if they're willing. Okay, if they're willing, and we'll sort of commit to try to do the right thing, but that doesn't take away that we still need to forgive. Okay, whether they want to change or not, whether they do anything different or not, we must still forgive them. We must still forgive them, but doesn't mean everything as it is before. So what will we look at next time? Okay, what we look at next time. Does forgiveness mean there are no consequences? Okay, does forgiveness mean there are no consequences? Does forgiveness mean I need to put up with an abusive situation? Okay. And what forgiveness is not? Okay, what forgiveness is not? Okay. Sometimes defining what something is not helps us understand what it is, okay, by looking at it in opposition. So we'll be looking at next time what forgiveness is not. So that'll be in a few weeks' time. Now, just like to close with a couple of clips about forgiveness. Last year, on the 1st of February, there was an accident where a man who was a drunk driver in a four-wheel drive, he hit a group of children, and 3 children from one family were killed, and a 4th child was killed who was a relation of the other person. Just like to show you the video of that.
The unbearable pain of a father grieving three of his six children. Danny Abdullah's.
Seem to have we get double videos.
The unbearable pain of a father grieving 3 of his 6 children. Danny Abdullah's sense of loss only equalled by love.
I was always say full-time father, part-time worker. They were my priority. And now they're gone.
The children were among a group of 7 walking and riding bikes with a babysitter at Oatlands just before 8 last night. The man behind the wheel of this blue 4-wheel drive had allegedly run a red light before he was captured on camera speeding down Bettington Road. Moments later, the vehicle was seen mounting the curb and ploughing into the children on the footpath.
When the first crews arrived on scene, they were confronted with carnage. Very, very difficult scene with obviously a lot of chaos.
Anthony, Angelina, Sienna and Veronique were killed. 3 other children were taken to hospital, including a boy in a critical condition.
What would you do if you were in that situation? Man, we wouldn't even want to contemplate it, would we? Wouldn't even want to contemplate what we'd do in such a situation. Well, instead of vengeance and hatred, they chose to forgive the driver. More than that, they started the national I Forgive Day on the eve of the first anniversary of their children's death. So this was just about 3 weeks ago that was launched, this I Forgive Day. And here's just a clip about that.
Their souls set free by a choice to forgive.
And we'll never be alone.
4 doves representing 4 lost angels.
I will see you again.
A new National Day of Reflection launched. Their siblings now asking for mercy from us.
Could you forgive people if they do something bad? I know that many will be blessed by giving.
Let's forgive.
A senseless tragedy. Anthony, Angelina, Sienna and Veronique killed by a drunk, drugged driver while on a walk to get ice cream.
Our whole country was shocked. We were devastated.
The family's faith-filled response last year stunned us all.
I don't hate him. I think in my heart I forgive him.
I had many friends and strangers say to me, I just don't know how they can do that. They are amazing.
If I didn't forgive the driver, my family wouldn't be the same, would be dysfunctional. My family would be destroyed.
What path do I take? The path of destruction or the path of construction?
I Forgive Day, the legacy of 4 innocent kids for everyone.
For all of us, at least once a year, to appreciate and reflect on our own lives.
For the families, from forgiveness, peace has blossomed. The ability to live on for their other children.
The peace is from above that it brings to you. I can't even explain it. It's amazing.
The most amazing grace. Serena Andaloro, 7 News.
Interesting story, isn't that? It was just a few weeks ago that that particular clip was, where they had this National Forgiveness Day. So yeah, made easier. It's not easy, is it? It's not always easy. Sometimes it is, but not always. Not always. But yeah, the guiding principle is forgive as the Lord has forgiven you.